Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member Shayna Punham II shares her path as a Big Four tax consultant to leaving the workforce for an extended period of time to help raise her two kids, how she broke back in, and advice she'd give to her younger self. Enjoy. Shayna Punham II, thank you so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So it'd be great if you could just give a quick bio to the listeners.
Sure. So I started out doing my undergraduate degree in accounting, MBA finance. I began first with a Big Four accounting firm on their tax staff and gained my CPA there with a certain number of years of experience, and then kind of pivoted towards my ultimate goal, which was the finance as a long-term career. And so I moved into debt capital markets, but on the investment grade side is loan syndications, and took some time off to raise my family, returned with a return-to-work internship in a credit rating agency, and moved on to investment banking, where I am currently.
Great. And so how long was your time off there to raise your family?
15 years.
There you go. So it's really interesting because we haven't had a guest on. We've had now several female guests, but we haven't had a guest on that has taken the break and then come back. So I'd love to jump into that later. But let's start further back, all the way in undergrad. So you're deciding to major in accounting. Was business and finance kind of always on the radar for you, or was it something that you kind of grew into, sophomore year? You're like, oh, tell me how you kind of came to think, okay, I'm going to do accounting.
Well, since high school, I was very interested in finance and knew that was my ultimate goal, and that I wanted to get an MBA in finance. I already kind of had it mapped out that I would do the MBA route, and I had a really good relationship with the deans at my school because I was in a scholarship program, and I was actually advised that accounting would be the perfect foundation for finance, and accounting was really part of the plan as being a two-step plan. So it really is an excellent education that's very important because you need to understand financial statements and accounting, even basic accounting entries, just broad-based, so that when you're reviewing financial statements as a financial analyst or investment banker, it makes sense to you. You know how to enter financials into a model. So really was a great option for me. And as I was researching careers in accounting when I was graduating, I discovered that taxation was just a more interesting entry-level option for me than auditing. There's a lot more research and analysis. There are legal aspects to it that I was working with. In addition, people who already were attorneys and had master's degrees, and I felt like it was a higher level kind of entry-level position.
Yeah, for sure. So did you do a couple of years there and then went back and got your MBA, or how did that work? Or did you go straight through?
I did a few years at a Big Four accounting firm, which was really fantastic training grounds. Just the professionalism and organization skills that you learn there are great. And I started going back to school at night and really didn't have that much coursework left, so I decided to leave, go full-time, got my finance MBA, but I had passed my CPA exam, yet not accrued the full experience requirement. So I actually returned to a different Big Four accounting firm just for a few more years to round out the experience requirement because I really felt that credential was important to having sort of crossed the T's on accounting and said, I really was an accountant and a CPA. So
tell me, was there any actual reason you didn't go back to the same firm as pre-MBA as post-MBA, or was it just you felt like the other big four firm that you ended up at wooed you better or some sort? Or how did it work? I guess when you were because you said you did the first year of your MBA kind of at night, and then you decided, hey, I'm just going to go full time, and you finished the second year kind of full time. Was that should I think of it that way?
Yes, I finished. Well, I didn't need 2 full years because I went to the same school for undergraduate and an MBA, and back then they had kind of a 5-year program. I had not completed every single course I needed to do it only 5 years, so it was like 5 years plus a semester or summer semester, let's say. So I did 1 term, and it was really extreme with the hours for work plus trying to do the MBA. So I left, and when I was, graduating with the MBA, looking at different options, I just felt the need to, and I did have a very good opportunity, and I worked really for my dream accounting firm, so to speak, the best of the best.
That's great.
And,
So tell me a little bit about, so you were kind of going back, you got your CPA, you're, a senior tax consultant at that point, you're doing interesting work. Do you feel like, what was it like back then in terms of just the culture, was it really collegial? Did you feel like you fit in there?
Back in the day, it's kind of funny.
I refer to my own experiences back in the day too. Don't feel bad.
I would liken it somewhat to IB. Maybe we weren't working 100 hours a week, but we were definitely putting in probably 70 to 80 hours a week. And during tax season, you may be at work 6 weeks straight, literally, without a breather. So it was very collegial. The junior people all helped each other, but we also had very good exposure to senior managers and partners. You were always involved in every meeting. So really top-level experience. But I always knew my ultimate goal was not to stay in accounting and become a tax partner. I really wanted finance from day one. And as it was, by year 5 as an accountant, I was chomping at the bit to just accrue the experience requirement I needed. As a tax professional, it's a little different than as an auditor. So that's why it took such an extremely long time. But
to get the CPA.
That credential has carried me, kind of like people get a CFA. The CPA has carried me as a credential all these years. People look to that as an accomplishment. So I'm glad that I pushed myself to do that.
So you were coming out of your MBA, so once you kind of went full-time, tell me a little bit about the recruiting there was it a time where you didn't have much trouble because you had that pre-MBA experience in the tax, and it was more like a just show up and the interviews weren't tough, or was it something where you had to prep and it was nerve-wracking? I know it's a while ago, but just to give the listeners a little bit of a taste of that.
Sure. I would say that it was much less stringent than it is now, a process. Coming out of undergraduate, it was extremely easy. You dropped your resume in a box, and a couple weeks later you had a bunch of sheets up on a wall of who wanted to interview you. And I had 11 companies interested in interviewing me, and by company 9 I was exhausted. I said, that's enough.
Fair.
Coming out of finishing the MBA, I really didn't push as much with finance recruiting because I knew that I needed to go back for the additional years to get the CPA. So I basically just applied directly to the firm that I was most interested in, interviewed, and was hired. It really was not a major effort.
Got it. Okay, fair enough. So you're working there, you get the CPA, and then you said you're chomping at the bit. How do you kind of approach this search? Do you feel like there's a big barrier to CPAs back then jumping to finance, or was it something that was pretty common? There
surely was. Through networking, I began to have some kind of informal to somewhat formal interviews at the larger banks, and I did meet with a lot of resistance. I surely met up with young professionals who looked at me and said, why do you want to switch now? You have an accounting background, then I thought, if a career is potentially 30 to 40 years, 5 years should not spent in one area should not limit me going forward. So, to me, I just feel that tenacity is what ends up paying off.
So how were you doing this networking? Were you just using alumni networks? How did you go about it? Like just creating that list of people to get in touch with?
Friends and family. I had some family members one was in HR at one of the large banks, and she called on her senior person, and they kind of got me in there. I found, fortunately, that once I get in the door, if I can get a phone call with someone, I tend to be invited back, which is just fortunate. So there were a couple of banks that I started to speak to, and actually then you could go to the school and they had listings. I went back to NYU, let's say. Sorry. I went to NYU. So I went and looked up the job listings, and there was a position posted that was great for exactly what I was interested in doing, which was debt capital markets, which seemed like a super option for me. So I was interviewed, and many of the people actually that worked there had also attended the same university, so I think that was helpful.
Great. And so in those interviews, I assume they weren't giving you a ton of technical accounting questions. Was it mostly about fit, or was it mostly just, why were you in tax for so long? What were the questions? Do you remember any of them, like specifically what they kind of harped on?
I don't remember there being a tremendous amount of technical questions. It was probably more fit and just being comfortable with what I had done there. And I had done a certain amount of modeling, even though they were tax models. You're developing these models that calculate complex through the tax laws and such. They're built around the tax laws. So I think that level of analysis was appreciated, and just the finance MBA was highly respected in the CPA. There just was an incredible connection with all the people there. There was a real comfort level. Okay. Once again, I was the only woman, I think, that even interviewed, and I did not interview with a single female. It was all male, and it was great. I never had an issue with that.
Okay.
It was really a good fit and a fantastic experience, and I was thrilled to be offered the position.
So did you end up having to take a pay cut, or was it a pay bump from there, if you remember?
I think that it was approximately lateral to start, but in the long run, it definitely was
pay jump.
Superior pay scale. And
For sure. So you break into debt capital markets. You're at a good bank doing that type of work. Tell me, what was that like? Because you were there for a while.
I was there for 7 years. It was absolutely fabulous. It was transaction-oriented, although for loan syndications on the investment grade side, everything is certainly not based on a company undertaking a transaction. Very frequently, this is just basic financing. Sometimes it's backstop credit facilities, sometimes just simple working capital facilities, but they're extremely large, so one bank will not lend alone. They hire my bank as lead agent, and we pull the syndicate together. We have to price it correctly, get it through credit committee, and we have to sell it. So there's a lot of similarity to investment banking in the process. We didn't really model companies from scratch the way you start with the financial statements. We were looking more at leverage ratios and coverage ratios and the like. So you're doing a lot of...
Where are you getting the projections from for that? Like, are you given to them by management and you just haircut it?
From the company themselves, or sometimes an investment banker who may be working on the transaction, and they'll send us the projections, and we create our own model off of that.
Got it.
That would show, the cash flows and such to pay off the debt and such.
Make sure that they could pay it back.
Absolutely,
That
that's
type of thing.
pretty important in
Yeah.
that you're not too close to your covenant levels.
Yeah.
It
And
was really a fabulous job because it was a smaller shop.
mm-hmm.
Although we were very highly ranked in the league tables
Mm-hmm.
and competing with the largest banks, it was a smaller shop overall, and everything from start to finish was on our plate. We didn't have a separate group that was negotiating the credit agreements or doing the pitches versus working on the actual transaction or calculating the fees. It
Yeah.
was all on me. I even used to plan the bank meetings and pick the food and worry about the audiovisual and pray that
You didn't
everything
even
worked.
have an admin back then. They just threw it
Uh,
all on you.
we had secretaries. We had some analysts, so you would have someone to assist you. But when you're at the associate level, it's kind of an interesting thing. You're everything from secretary to managing director when
True.
you're an associate. And you
True.
better know how to fix that copy machine at 2 o'clock in the morning because there's no one else to do it. And the bank books might be needed the next morning.
So do you feel like your experience prior, had you been managing people at all prior at the Big Four, once you were kind of a senior post MBA? You had a
I
team?
had not
Okay.
managed people previously, and it's something that I loved and still love, mentoring and training students who are just out of undergraduate usually.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely something that I fell right into naturally and absolutely love.
So tell me about that. Is it, I guess you were kind of an associate. Was the expectation that you would become a vice president there, or what was the track there, or was there a track to partner or to director?
There's a track to managing director,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, I think, fairly similar to IB, where there are people come in as analysts. You can most certainly stay on and become an associate. There's not sort of a demand to return for a master's degree. Potentially there is now, but
Yep.
then there really wasn't that demand, so to speak. But you just follow up to associate, VP, and MD.
Got it. And so was that in the cards for you? Did you think, hey, I'm going to make it all the way up to MD one day, or that was
I
at the
did.
goal?
I really absolutely did think that and wanted to do that and felt really supported by the group there. They mentored me as well, and they kind of pulled me along.
Mm-hmm.
It was not an aggressive environment. It was a busy environment and an intensive environment. I worked with, honestly, people that were brilliant. I still think they're brilliant. I'm still in touch with most of them. But, you know, I waited a very long time to start my family, and when I did, there just wasn't the same kind of flexibility then as there is now for new moms.
So tell me a little bit about that. Like, so what was it like then when I assume were you married when you kind of joined, or did you get married then? And then
Yeah.
did children come
I
soon?
started married, which was probably a fortunate thing. So I started there, and I was already married, and I worked for 6 years before I had my first child.
Mm-hmm.
Took a leave, came back for a year, and then chose to stay home. It was
So
difficult
first
to
off, how many
commute,
do you have? How many children do you have now?
I have 2.
You have 2. So I have
So-
3 children, 4, 2, and 10 months, and I'm drowning. So I can't imagine with a real job like this where you have to go in the office. So you had.
I used to go in on 2 hours of sleep for weeks on
Oh my
weeks
gosh.
on end. So, you know, I had a new baby, and new babies wake up in the middle of the night. They need to eat.
How long was your leave with your first baby? Because you went back, you said, for a year. How long did you take?
My leave was actually 5 months because I put together all of the possible vacation and time off I could
Good.
between 1 year and the next. And I actually left a few weeks before I was due. I have friends who pushed it to the very last minute and had all kinds of emergencies. And I just said, I'm exhausted. 3 hours a day of traveling. It was
Yeah.
a lot going into Manhattan.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so you left a couple weeks early. You have 5 months. You're back. You do it for a year, and then what kind of was okay? I'm not doing this anymore. Was it just, the stuff at home, just trying to balance everything? What was the thought process of, hey, I'm going to take some time and just be with the kids? financial, everything.
That's
I mean, I
exactly
know it's,
it.
I know it's a
You
tough
never expect to stay home a significant amount of time. It was a combination of exhaustion and just hopefulness that somehow you're just taking a short period off and you'll be back. There just, unfortunately, there wasn't any sort of flexibility where they could allow me to work part-time. People weren't really bringing home laptops and able to plug in on a day-to-day basis like that. So it was,
Do you think you would have
I'm
done
very
that?
hopeful it's different now.
Do you think you would have done that? Like, would you have been happy to be part-time? Do you think you would have preferred
Yeah.
that?
I begged. I would have been thrilled. I never wanted to leave. I know that
Yeah.
sounds awful. It's not because I don't love my children and being at home, but I truly missed working. I absolutely love my career. That's why I put off.
Yeah, I don't know
having
how
family.
I don't know how stay-at-home dads or moms do it, because if over the weekend I am exhausted with my kids, and and just the mental stimulation, like it's a different type of mental stimulation. It's like trying to figure out, okay, how am I gonna juggle this? But it's like you really miss the work aspect too, and the interaction with adults, right? I guess you have that with play dates and all that, but still, it's
Enormously. No, it's don't even go
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It is apples to oranges.
Yeah.
It's completely different. I miss it tremendously. Although in the years I was off as my children began to be in school and such, I got extremely involved in various volunteer works. I was
That's
on
great.
board of trustees.
What was the gap
know,
between your
on-
first and second child?
4 years.
4 years. Okay, like me and my sister. So you were changing diapers for a long time then. Okay, so
I guess I was changing diapers for a while. You try to do other things in between
Yeah.
and be as active as possible and keep up your skills as much as possible. But it was kind of a tough thing. It was
but you got
your
involved.
identity is very much as a professional, I think, and not any less as a woman than a man, feeling like this is what I do and who I am. So it was hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So do you feel like as your children got older, you became more involved with like like you said, giving back and with their schooling, and were you involved kind of in the community that way, or did you ever start looking back at potentially coming back earlier, or was it just one of those things that just you didn't want to commit those hours again?
I think still there wasn't really the mentality of not just flexibility of allowing people to return. I was working practically full-time as a volunteer on boards and in committees and such between their schools and a local
Right.
charity I was involved with. So I was very involved, and you're using a lot of your skills. I was doing budgeting sometimes and the like. But I always hoped that somehow I would find my way back, and it's really in recent years that large financial services firms have realized this enormous resource of talent that is, highly experienced, that they just let us go, kind of, and they're starting to do these return to work internships. It's very popular in Manhattan, and
Can you tell me
that's
about those? Because I
exactly-
know very little about them. Can you tell me like how it works and what's the idea? Is it's just like an internship for people who've been out of work for a while, and how does that work? Like who's doing?
exactly what it is.
But who's doing
So-
where do people find out about this stuff? Because where should they look, or what should they look up?
They can look up, I'm trying to remember the name of the website that is specifically, it's called Apres, A-P-R-E-S, like in French, apres.com. It is for like a second act for women. They have the return to work internships as well as just companies that are listing with them who are looking for seasoned professional women who have been out of the workforce. It's just become something that's understood that these women still have capabilities and talents and motivation. So I had started to look on that website and just broadly seeing listings for these returnships. For Goldman Sachs has it, Morgan Stanley has it. I actually interviewed at Morgan Stanley, and then I ended up going to Fitch Ratings. They had fantastic credit path returnship, they call it. I was in the inaugural class. There were only 8 of us, which to me it was like winning the lottery.
Okay.
Because I know that there were many people who applied for the return to work internships. And from what I'm understanding, I don't know if every single one works in the same manner, but the format is broadly that you have a couple of weeks of training, bringing us up to speed on everything from how they do their credit analysis to Excel and macroeconomics, the company's policies on how they look at credit ratings and such. So that was really informative, interesting. It really pulled the group together. We had unbelievable speakers, and then they embed you in a group that is relevant to your prior professional experience. And I was embedded in the TMT, Tech, Media, and Telecom group, and I thought, great, I did a lot of media and telecom, I'll be fine. And of course, they gave me this tech company to write a credit opinion for that I had to first, I can't even tell you how many days I was reading about this particular kind of technology to even figure out what it was, much less to try to analyze the company. But then at the end, you do a full credit committee presentation, and it's like not published, but it's available, I suppose, to someone who wants to review this particular credit opinion that we put together.
And so tell me a little bit about specifically, is the idea that you'll go on to, that's just an experience to help you kind of get to your feet under you, or is there ever full-time offers given from that program?
There are full-time offers given from the program. I did have participants that were with me that did take on full-time roles.
How many of the 8 would you say?
I want to say that 5 were offered roles immediately, 1 a few months later, and I was already interviewing for this other position, so what I was offered wasn't really exactly where I wanted to be. So I continued to interview with this regional investment bank and landed there very happily.
Great. And tell me a little bit about working there. Given that you had so many years of experience prior to the long layoff, you kind of come back, you do this one internship, which is only for a few months, and then all of a sudden you're back in back into the grind. And you're in investment banking. And how has that been? What's it like now, kind of after that long layoff? Is it the transition tough, or have you kind of just picked right back up?
It's amazing how I feel like I snapped my finger and I felt like that was the real me again, particularly when I first started at the internship. And I wasn't, after a couple of months of working full-time, everybody starts to feel a little bit of the wear and tear, but it really was a snap of the fingers to get back into the groove. And the work is not dissimilar from what I was doing before, particularly as far as multitasking, organizing, switching gears between different types of projects and different tasks within a project, whether it's quantitative versus qualitative. I did have quite a bit to learn, and I kind of joke that I have what I call millennial mentors. I was basically put in a pool of associates that are significantly younger than me. They've been fantastic. They have really helped me get up to speed on all things technological. These are people who grew up with technology as their day-to-day, their baseline. And, of course, previously I was using, Excel and Microsoft Office Suite products.
Tell me what's different. Like, where have you felt like there's been the steepest learning curve that they've helped you technologically? Besides smartphones and apps and stuff like that.
When I first got to Fitch, I had never seen Outlook before, so I know that that's probably pretty funny to most people who would be listening to this. But I would say that I really got a lot of help with basic, the file explorer, the whole background of how everything is organized
Like in
online,
different file
let's say.
systems and stuff,
Different ways to research on Google.
Okay.
Certainly Excel, I've gotten much quicker. Can I do everything without taking my hands off of the keyboard, never using the mouse? Probably not. But I also took some courses. You know, you guys kind of talk about Wall Street prep, and we use it at our firm, and
Great.
we have our interns use it, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. And anybody who's looking at the industry should consider, you know, doing some of the courses in there because it really
Agreed.
helps you, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so you've kind of gotten up to speed on the Excel portion because as an associate, you're managing the analyst, but you still have to kind of have the technical chops, right, to be able to check the analyst's work and kind of even manage up, right, to the VPs and MDs. So, is it something where you felt like you've struggled a little bit there, but you're kind of now hitting your stride, or is it something where it just was like a couple months of steep learning curve and it was fine?
Well, kind of funny, when I first joined the firm, it's IB, but we also have valuation and corporate advisory and the like. So there was a shortfall in staff on the valuation team, and I was sort of put in with a few other associates over there to help them with some valuations. And the modeling was where we really just had to figure things out, and you're really figuring it out pretty much from scratch, just looking at a prior year or another example. So
Right.
I would say that learning the model definitely took a few months, had some challenges, but it's amazing how you can pivot from one area of finance to another, even potentially, I wouldn't say quite the same as accounting to finance as finance within finance to another, but you can really, with some effort, figure out just about anything, and that's what I had to do. Certainly I was permitted to ask questions, but there just wasn't a lot of time for that. So
They're like,
we
get
just
to work.
kind of,
Yeah.
it's
like,
an iterative process, and
it.
now I feel much more comfortable with our model and modeling, but I had to learn it, and it's been great.
That's great. And so do you feel like what's the future hold for you? What do you think?
Just more of the same, you know, continuing to learn, and each transaction is so different, and clients are so different. It's really exciting to work in so many different industries, and in my firm they have actually the associates involved in some of the business development. So because it's a small firm, and again we're kind of soup to nuts, they need us to assist on the business development side. So that's a lot of fun, doing some of the marketing, and
so you want to like just grow with this firm and then see where it takes you, kind of thing. And then is that the idea? I
think so.
Yeah, that's
great.
I think
so. You know, you never know really what the future's going to hold.
True.
But it is a very nice fit, and
are the hours bad?
No, it's not a bulge bracket kind of hours firm. It's much more reasonable. It's still busy full time, and we still get emails any old hour and over the weekend, and sometimes you're working additional hours, but it's flexible. You have a laptop. You can,
Fair.
You can go home, see people, feed people dinner, and log back in if I need to.
Got it. Do you feel like you're able to balance it well now? So it sounds like you're doing 50-ish hours a week or something around there. Do you feel like you're able to balance it well with the family life and all that? Your kids are old enough now where you feel like it's not too much of a strain?
It's still sometimes a challenge. I feel that if anything suffers, potentially it's more on the family side, because honestly, it is, maybe it's not two full-time jobs, but it's a job and a half.
Yeah, it's tough.
I have school-age children, and it's busy. There's always something very particular. Somebody is, looking at colleges. Another one is studying for something particular, and it's hard to manage everything. But you do it. It's a team effort.
Great. And so, tell me, any specific advice before we call the pod? Any specific advice you'd give yourself, kind of your younger self, or prior to your break, or even in undergrad?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to really try to learn certain skills on your own and to not only expect that you'll learn them on the job. You're not, just because you're out of school doesn't mean that you're done learning. And especially, I would say maybe it's a little different now. There's so much available to people online to prepare themselves and to add to their knowledge that I really would encourage people to keep learning and definitely work on getting whatever professional credentials are relevant for your career.
Mm-hmm. And tell me, we had mentioned earlier before we started recording about you do a lot of the intern interviews, and
yeah.
there's something you told me you want to cover that. You said a lot of people aren't prepared, or you're surprised people come in and aren't prepared. How would you suggest people come into these internship interviews? How could they make a better impression?
Okay. Well, we don't actually have analysts. We rely completely on interns who are college and sometimes MBA students.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that they often don't really have the solid accounting and IB knowledge as far as the quantitative items, and those questions are really available everywhere online. You really should know your basics, and it's become not quite baseline, but if you've done an online modeling course like Wall Street Prep, which we have all of our interns do when they start. We all, as associates, did it. I did something completely different before I even started interviewing. I think that people really need to understand the modeling, be able to talk their way through financial statements, understand how the statements flow into each other, and just be better prepared for what you should expect to be asked in an IB interview.
Yeah.
And really have a good ability to say, here's the skills I have from XYZ job, and this is why they're directly applicable to financial modeling and statement analysis.
It's kind of weaving the story together better, rather than just
weaving the story together much better. Yes,
yeah.
You really need to know. You need to know the financial statements, basically.
Yeah, I agree. Do you feel like this is something often I advise young students and interns or people trying to break into good internships? Do you feel like prepping stories beforehand, so like leadership stories or stories of struggle, prepping those beforehand help as well?
I think it's absolutely crucial, and I do feel like the students do have a fairly decent hold and handle on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing a lot more young people who are already in their careers a year or two and now want to pivot and are willing to just put that aside and take an internship, which is very modestly paid, just to try to get the experience so that they can try to head over towards investment banking. And some are definitely much better prepared than others, but surely you need to have your elevator speech. You need to know your resume very well. Don't ever put anything on your resume that you can't explain or answer to. I've seen that, and you just feel awful for the person because there's always going to be somebody who's going to really ream them on that.
Yeah.
It's good to be able to keep your cool, so know what you need to say and have your stories, your narrative mapped out.
And do you think just like doing mock interviews helps? How did you prep, or how did you get ready for your own?
I find that it's great to just type out what you want to say and practice it. You can practice it to yourself. You can video yourself. You can just record yourself. You can practice with a classmate, a parent, someone from maybe your school, career office, anything that they have. I know that there are a lot of on-campus clubs now that are very much geared towards these different professions and go through things like what to expect for the interview. Keep your LinkedIn updated. Put a nice professional picture of yourself on there. You know, it's better to have something than nothing, but don't have a cute picture of yourself. Have a headshot kind of picture.
Got it.
And
Fair advice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been great.
thanks.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.